Hey everyone, it's Britt here with Green Bee Flowers. Now, in case you can't tell by my multiple layers going on here, it is chilly at the farm. We are at the end of March and I'm feeling a little bit like we were lied to by the old wives' tale, which is March comes in like a lion and out like a lamb. And I feel like for most of Ontario, it's also going out like a lion. Cool. So we're dressed appropriately today because brr. However, I will say that I am extremely grateful. We are in like the southernmost point of Ontario, Canada, and that means that we did not get the ice storm that many of our northern friends did get, and those really, really cold temperatures. So I am extremely grateful for that. But you can hear we're still getting rain. Lots of rain, right? We're coming in on April showers, right? And it is very dreary. I think this is probably the grayest winter and spring we have had in a very, very long time. And I am really, really looking forward to sunshine. So with that, let's get into today's video. Green Bee Floral Co. is a 2.5-acre cut flower farm and boutique floral shop located in small town Southwestern Ontario, Canada. We began growing flowers in 2019 as a way to find joy and beauty amidst the struggle of raising our medically complex child. In 2023, we opened our dream floral shop in our little hometown, bringing modern floral design, our favorite luxe imported blooms, and seasonal local flowers to our community. Welcome to our little flower-filled world. We're so glad you're here. Favorite things from this time of year is listening to the birds. Surefire sign of spring. All right, so one of the things that I wanted to go over was some of the tulips that we have growing in the hoop house here for our spring crops. We've done kind of a variety of single tulips and double tulips, and I've picked tulip varieties that I know we sell lots of in the store, because obviously that is the goal, right? So there's my Canadian coming out again, eh? Anyways, now this first variety here, this is the double tulip. I believe this is Mondial, but I do have to go back and look because the vole ate the tag. I always like to have a nice, simple white tulip. You've seen in previous videos, we've harvested the exotic emperor double already, and those were extremely popular. They're extremely beautiful, but it is good for us always to have just a nice classic white double. I will probably add more of these in. This is a really lovely variety. I really like these because they are a nice long straight stem. They are hardy, which means that when we rehydrate these, they rehydrate well, and they tend to stay fairly straight even in the vase. I also like the mondials because their flower heads are not super heavy. I find sometimes with the really large peony varieties of like double tulips that the heads are so big that they actually like droop and sometimes will drop, right? And then they bend depending on how heavy they are. So part of that is just that the stalk itself isn't like taut enough for it to hold up the bloom. But part of it, I think, also is that the varieties that we are growing as cut flowers, like there are tried and true versions of things for a reason. There's like, when you go into a flower shop in the spring and you know they're going to have the same varieties of like singles and the yellows, the pink, the purple, and also the same varieties of doubles. So like very commonly you'll find like Amazing Grace, which is a really good double cut flower tulip, because they're consistent and they bloom well. So this variety I really like as well, because the customers are really happy with this. It's very easy to store and it looks good in a vase long term. Another one that we really love, I believe this is Menton. It's either Menton or Apricot Delight. I'll put it right on the screen here. This one I have been a fan of for a number of years. Not just because, I mean, look at the color, but as far as singles go, this is a really large blooming single. It's got a good sized flower head on it and it's stunning, right? The color is like a sunset. It's gorgeous. Like in the summer, this tulip to me is like the equivalent of like golden hour, right? On the farm in the summer, is it just gives all of those same rich hues and it's so beautiful. So this for me is a 10 out of 10. Love growing this one. It's again one of our quickly scooped up tulips in the spring here at Green Bee. I have mislabeled this one 3 times on my Instagram. So this one is Double Dolce, and this one's interesting because it's got like some of the Rembrandt-y like coloring and the tips to it. Double Dolce sometimes comes in like a more coffee color. This early in the season, it tends to bloom a little bit more like raspberry and white. Again, it's very lovely. It's another weirdo, which to me, weirdo tulips are like the ones that don't necessarily have all like even petals. Sometimes when they bloom out, they're a little wonky. Exotic Emperor is another one of those, but I kind of love them because they're so interesting, and I think interesting is part of what makes them beautiful. Nature doesn't always have to be exactly perfect. These guys are really beautiful. Stem lengths on these are getting to be really great. And then lastly, my all-time favorite tulip is Copper Image. I hope that they never discontinue Copper Image because just look at it. It's so beautiful. Where like depending on how the light hits it, it looks a little coral, it looks a little copper. It's got beautiful veining like throughout the petals at this stage here, and it just is stunning. Now, every year I've noticed with Copper Image, it does tend to have slightly, shorter stems. So like if you're to compare, these two together, you can see that the apricot, like these guys have like at least an inch growth on them. But I just like together, look at how gorgeous they are, right? They're so beautiful. Tulips, I think, can be sometimes such an underrated crop because, especially in my climate, they're very easy to grow, right? We have cold enough winters here that for the most part they perennialize really well, and a lot of people have them in their home gardens. And we also have big box stores that sell single tulips and sometimes double tulips for very cheap. Like we're coming in on the season where you can purchase really poorly cared for direct from the farm like Netherlands tulips for like $7 at the big box stores. So like Royal Canadian Superstore, Walmart, places like that. The problem with those obviously is that they're not properly cared for. Rarely do they get extra water. They're already like a week old by the time they get into the stores. And so sometimes I think tulips get a bad like reputation because we're so used to crappy grocery store tulips that as like those same varieties that have made it into like the florist sphere. Oh, coining a new term, the florist sphere. Flower farmers around here are having just, you know, a more interesting challenge where we have to sell these for what they're worth, while also dealing with the general, I think, lack of information that, you know, customers have around what like a good tulip variety, a long-lasting tulip variety is, and the difference between something that's harvested and goes from like our farm into the shop in 24 hours versus the tulips that are being sold in the big box stores that have, like, you know, made this long treacherous trip, had to be rehydrated, and then are sold in like plastic, right? And it's fine. It's just, it's part of the flower ecosystem, but it is always a challenge for, you know, non-commercial growers getting their product into stores and building up that customer base when you have to basically re-educate customers from the get-go as to why something like this is better than your $7 bunches of tulips. And like, realistically, I'm never going to be able to do 10 tulips for $7. That doesn't, for some of them, doesn't even cover the amount of money spent on the bulbs. And so it's just, with everything in the cut flower world, we are re-educating the public and trying to teach them why local flowers are in fact important. Tulips are a great example of that. Doing a super duper hard pick on ranunculus today. We'll come back and get those soon, but I did want to grab a couple, especially of these like dark ones, because they are going to be going in an a la carte bridal bouquet later this week, and so I wanted to grab them now so that they would have a bit of a chance to open up a bit and rehydrate in the cooler. Normally when we pick wedding flowers, we do want to make sure that we're picking them at least like 3 days in advance of when they're going to be going out, because they need a chance to hydrate in the cooler. If you pick flowers the day before the event that you have to do, they're probably not going to survive properly for you because they haven't had a chance to rehydrate well. Rehydrated stems are always easier to design with than stems that are fresh picked, because flowers need an opportunity to recover a little bit from the stress of being cut from the plant. In the same way, you and I need some water to, you know, rehydrate after long, hard days. So they are starting to get longer. Some of our ranunculus are finally putting out, you know, some beefy stems. These are much more in line with what I would like to see, but we do still have some small ones, and these will actually work just fine for the wedding, because they are still about 8-inch stems. The specific style of bouquet she wants, these are going to sit a little deeper in, and they're there for the color palette, not necessarily to be like whimsy pieces sticking up from the bouquet, but they are quite lovely. So I wanted to take a quick moment just to do a little bit of housekeeping with regards to some administrative stuff for YouTube videos, comments, questions. So for starters, first of all, I wanted to just say thank you for subscribing to the channel, for liking the content. I'm very happy that you guys are here, that you're finding, you know, joy and usefulness in this channel, but I did want to just lay a quick ground rule to remind everybody who is watching the channel that you are more than welcome to leave comments below. I do my best to answer those questions. We also have a Patreon channel, which you are welcome to subscribe to, where there is a chat function on there that you are welcome to use if you have questions about suppliers and things like that. I will ask that if you are a channel member, please refrain from reaching out to our Instagram and Facebook accounts via message. One, I probably won't see it. Second of all, I use those two platforms specifically for shop related things. And so the likelihood that I'm going to respond to that on there is like very close to zero. It is much easier for me to, push all of the YouTube comments and respond to YouTube related comments through here. I don't do the crossover very well because just those platforms function differently for our business, right? So if you do have questions, you do have comments, you are looking for recommendations on things, please post them in the comments below. Don't send them via email. Don't send them to our Facebook page or Instagram. I don't want them to get lost, and I don't want you to feel like you guys are ignoring me. I just want to make sure that the appropriate channels are being used for the appropriate things. So thank you so much for just abiding by that. Okay, so I wanted to also just take a moment to talk about, I think, some of the challenges around growing and selling tulips, and also I think some of the infrastructure that you absolutely need in order to grow, harvest, and design well with tulips. So, as talked about already, some of the challenges involve the fact that there's so much customer education involved in the difference between like a grocery store tulip and a farm grown tulip. But I also think, like, aside from that, there is the added complication that, where we are in Southwestern Ontario, Canada, and I think this is probably true for a lot of Canadian growers and probably American growers as well, tulips are not an inexpensive purchase for the farm, right? Depending on what varieties you are growing and, where in the world you live, bulbs that are being imported into Canada from the Netherlands can be anywhere from, I think the lowest I've seen them was like 35 cents a bulb, all the way up to $3.50 a bulb for like the really luxe bougie varieties, right? We definitely, when we're ordering, try and keep the bulb price under $1. So the maximum amount that I'm probably going to pay for a double tulip is going to be, 95 cents to $1.10 per bulb. Because when you think about how much you're going to be able to sell that for later, a good base price is to take the bulb amount, multiply it by 2 or 3, depending on what your markup is, to kind of incorporate your cogs, and then, calculate your labor on top of that. Again, I've got a whole video series coming on doing your cogs as a flower farmer, and I'm running that actually through some other growers right now just to make sure that the math, that's coming regardless. So I think that one of the things with tulips is that it can be a cost prohibitive crop, and tulips require and like very specific environments to grow in. So where we are in Southwestern Ontario, Canada, we are very, I think, lucky in the tulip growing world that we have cold enough weather that they get their like cold stratification process done underground well enough, and we have enough snow here that they don't require a ton of extra watering in the field. If you are growing tulips in a greenhouse or in like indoors, there's a whole cold stratification process you either have to implement yourself, or you're going to be purchasing bulbs from the wholesaler that has the cold stratification already done, right? So that can be another added complication in growing tulips themselves. You know, the next thing to bear in mind is that not all tulip bulbs are grown equally. They don't all do well in every single climate. And so for us personally, I have terrible growth and terrible harvests with parrot tulips. I've actually minimized the amount of parrot tulips that we grow from year to year to just focus on the ones that I know are going to grow well. And most of the time that's the Estelle Reinveld and the apricot parrot, because I know that those ones are going to bloom for me. Parrot tulips are such a late bloomer for us here that by the time they're ready to go, and it's like May, we're already hitting temperatures that are well above what those tulips want in order to bloom like properly, right? And I also find for where we are that they tend to be more susceptible to different types of diseases, specifically tulip fire. And so for us, I just don't bring them in. You, in a different climate, may find that different varieties work really well for you. And so while I can't grow a parrot tulip to save my life out here just because of the climate, I know that there are growers that live on the prairies who have cooler springs and a much longer temperate spring who have much better luck with some of the more high-end interesting varieties of tulips that are just really never going to be what I want to grow here. And so I think that some of those are really good, you know, notes to just put into the back of your head as you're thinking about organizing and ordering now, because right, flower farmers are ordering their bulbs now for the following season when we haven't even had our tulips bloom yet. My tulip bulb order for next year is already in. It's been in actually for about 2 to 3 weeks, and that includes the irises, the lilies, basically any, not lilies, hyacinths, daffodils, any of my spring bulbs that are coming in the fall are already ordered. And truthfully, there are a lot of varieties that I have cut out going into 2026 because I really want to focus on streamlining the farm's offerings so that they have, you know, good production value long term. Another thing you have to think about with tulips is storage. And I think this is true of a lot of flowers in general, but especially your spring flowers that prefer having cold outside temperatures for them to grow and bloom well. You need to mimic that environment for them because heat opens up the flowers really, really quickly. I do not recommend growing tulips as cut flowers if you do not have some sort of cooling storage system in place. And I can speak to this from experience because if you remember last year, the farm cooler had a fan break, which needed to be replaced right in the middle of tulip season. And we lost thousands of dollars in tulips in that cooler because it was too humid, they molded, and we didn't have ways to store them in the store that would give them the cold that they needed in order so that they wouldn't bloom out. And that was a huge issue. And so speaking from experience, make sure that you have some sort of fridge for your tulips. You will absolutely need it. It doesn't have to be a fancy walk-in fridge. We used just a like 3-door sliding pop fridge that is currently my bloomer fridge at the store. We use that for many years in our garage. And I've seen growers, I've seen like small gardeners use modified, just like old fridges from your kitchens, right? Like it doesn't have to be fancy, but you definitely need to have some infrastructure in place in order for them to do well. From where we are, I do not find that tulips are specifically susceptible to a lot of like pests, but tulips can be susceptible to disease. So whereas we had some of our tulip bulbs that were eaten out by a vole, and I talked about that a few videos back in the greenhouse, that's fine. Losses happen. The biggest thing to worry about, especially in your fields, is issues like tulip blight, the one where it just takes the head, right? The head of the bulb or the tulip doesn't like grow at all, is another problem often with tulips. Tulip fire is another really common disease that rips through, and these are incredibly pervasive diseases that can infect your entire tulip crop very quickly. Interestingly enough, I do also personally find that your fancier varieties of tulips tend to be more susceptible to these types of diseases. And I really do think it's funny that like those unicorn tulips and those unicorn dahlias seem to be the hardest ones to like grow, and that's insanely frustrating. But I also think that these varieties are expensive because they are so much more susceptible to damage, to disease. It is harder to get a nice flower out of some of these varieties. And so if you are growing your tulips in a field as opposed to in crates in a greenhouse, there are a few things you need to keep in mind. For starters, just like dahlias, you should not be planting your tulips in the same part of the field every single year, because that is going to increase your chances of having disease infect your tulip bulbs if you continue to plant them into the same place. Tulips also eat a lot of energy out of the soil. They have really deep, robust root systems that take up a lot of nutrients and don't put a lot of nutrients back in. And so you are also going to find that year after year, you may find that your tulip crops are not putting out as flower, or if not flowering the way you'd like them, if you continue to put them in exactly the same spot every single year. And I think crop rotation is something that as your growing practices increase, you do need to be paying attention to this. Now, similarly, if you are growing your tulips in a greenhouse, we absolutely do not recommend that you reuse the dirt that those tulips were in from year to year, because again, cross-contamination from any diseases that the previous year's bulbs might have can then be passed on to your next year's crops. You do not want that as a part of your tulips. When you are thinking about your tulips, you need to actually have a plan in place for more than 1 year. On our farm, we rotate our 7,000 tulip bulbs throughout different pockets of the farm so that over a 3-year rotation, we are not putting the tulips in the same place. And I think that that's really important both for the health of the soil, but the health of the tulips themselves. We all know now, if you are following all of the flower farmers, that tulips have to be grown as annuals. Granted, you're always going to miss some when you're digging up the bulbs. It's just the way it goes, which is also why I think a lot of tulip growers have moved over into creating tulips, leaving them in coolers for the winter and kind of bringing them out into the spring to like get them awake. It's so important to have a plan in place for how you are going to rotate the crop of your tulips, and then subsequently also your dahlias throughout your fields for 3 to 5 years. That plan needs to be in place. Otherwise, you are going to be risking infecting your bulbs with problematic, diseases later on. So lastly, with this video, I wanted to take a moment to talk about our plans for 2026 tulip crops. I had big plans to utilize our like host farms heated greenhouse infrastructure for this year, but for a whole host of reasons that just wasn't a feasible option for us for 2025. But my hope is that I will be able to jump on that into 2026. So one of the goals on the flower farm is not necessarily for us to have 12 months of flowers, but definitely for us to look at 11 months of flowers, considering, January being the off month, right? Our goal will always be to have green bee grown flowers for Valentine's Day here in small town Southwestern Ontario. I am lucky in the sense that I have a shop that I can move our flowers through. But I think it's a really important goal for us to have as a business. And part of that is figuring out the details around the infrastructure and the planting schedule in the large heated greenhouse so that we can start to map out and prepare for those blooms next year. As I said, our 2026 bulbs are already ordered. And I have a spreadsheet, a list on my computer of varieties that we've ordered with the quantities that we're going to be planting in crates. As well, I have already started thinking about the contingency of having to go through that cold stratification process with bulbs that we currently already have. Now, one of the things that you have to remember with tulips is that you cannot leave them or should not leave them in storage for longer than 6 months at the risk of them trying to grow it on their own and not blooming properly. And Nick has we trialed this. So Nick has a bunch of off crates in our cooler right now at the farm that we were just curious to see how long we could get them to go for. But what ended up happening is that they started to grow, and essentially we've got long, first tulip leaves on them that are this long because they're trying to reach towards any sort of light, right? So instead, what we decided to do was designate a certain amount, and I think it's about 1,000 bulbs that we have planted in the ground this year that are no cuts. So that is going to be a specifically marked row in our tulip patch, which we all know we are not cutting from. We are not harvesting those. The goal on those is to let them bloom and then die back so that those bulbs then in May can be pulled out. They can be trimmed once all of the foliage has died back, right? Because that's what feeds the bulb. Trimmed, put them into the crates, and then put them into the cooler for the summer months so that in November, we can actually begin pulling those out of the cooler and bring them into the greenhouses, preferably the heated greenhouse, but even our regular standing greenhouse, depending on the weather, so that we can get a move on earlier tulips and hopefully have tulips for Valentine's next year. What I don't want to do in the future anymore, right? We live in town and rent space outside of town for our farm. And we have in the past brought some of our tulip crates in and brought them in and did them under the grow lights in the basement. And the reality is that I just really don't want to do that anymore. So creating and figuring out these sorts of small ways that I can contingency plan for year after year to get our flowers blooming quicker and starting to mimic the natural bloom and grow process of the flowers themselves is one of the things that I want to experiment with and find out if it works, because that might help some of you in the future. And I realize that a lot of these are very long, drawn out processes that are steps, and it's not something that's an instant gratification, but it is something that I think is worth trialing, because as we start to think about, the changing global economy and everything that entails, I am curious to do more research into plants themselves and flower farming itself, because right now we are all tied to, the wholesalers and the corms and the seed providers in order to, purchase what we need to grow our crops every year. But I'm also really curious to know how we can kind of push what's possible on some of these things as well. And tulips, I think, is a really great way to do that, where even like we've been planting the little baby like offshoot bulbs like year after year to see how long it logistically takes to get a full bulb and then a flower from something like that. I am very curious to find out how we can sort of stretch and experiment with what's already known about some of these flowers in our climate, that it may help, you know, some of our North American growers as we move on. I do think with tulips as a whole, so again, I am so lucky because of the climate that we are in here in Ontario, that we really do have, I think, one of the best climates that you can grow tulips in, although I would argue that the mild springs, the moderate springs out on the West Coast are probably very good for that as well, especially as you get closer to the north and the days go, anyways, it's a whole thing. I do think that Ontario specifically is in a unique position where we are so connected with, you know, greenhouses and flower growers that are already in place, but we do also have some of the most fertile land in the world. We're very lucky here in the Great Lakes Basin, but we also have really interesting microclimates here as well. And I am so fascinated to figure out what we can do here to sort of, I think, change the conversation around local flowers and what is possible at a development level going forward that doesn't obviously infringe upon patents and things like that. But there's a lot here, right? Like, I'm interested too in whether like creating bulbs from tulip pollen. Like, I know you can get identical, like it's like dahlias, right? You can get identical tulips from harvesting little baby bulbs and like slowly, but I'm also curious about creating new varieties and how long that will take. And so like all of these conversations are years worth of goals and projects that are in the back of my brain that I really would like to just, you know, tap away at, you know, as we have the time and energy. And this is probably something I'm going to work on for the rest of my life, because unlike what I believed when I was young, science is really cool, and flower science is perhaps the coolest of it all. So yeah, so that's it. That's my long ramble. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative. If you have questions, comments, post them down below. If you enjoyed the video, hit like. If you would like more flower farming content from us, be sure to hit that subscribe somewhere down there. As always, thank you so much for watching. We will see you in the next video. Bye guys.